Greetings. Welcome to this episode of In Times Like These. My name is Ed Potter, and I'm not going to tell you that I know when the world will end. But political and economic news of the day is fertile ground for the proliferation of prophets of doom. They say the apocalypse is imminent. Others say the hysteria is merely a version of Chicken Little's alarm. The sky is falling. Credible news reports, however, are so close to the clear warnings in the Bible that I think only a fool would deny there's a connection between the current reality and biblical predictions. While there's truth in the saying, a fool and his money are soon parted, the Bible foretells a day when the wise will be separated from their money. For 6 months, bank regulations kept me from accessing my accounts in Portugal. And I got a small taste of what's coming for the world as a whole. In my case, I had no choice. But be prepared because you will have to make a choice one day. Will you follow the money and be a fool, or be wise and follow God? I've studied Bible prophecy for many years, and I have a settled, studied understanding of what I believe about the main events of the end times. I know my view will not coincide with what most evangelical Christians believe, probably, but another person's interpretation of end time events is not a deal breaker for me. I reserve the right to be wrong about the details, but I also reserve the right to believe others can be wrong too. After all, God's not waiting on the advice of any of us on how to bring about the end of this age. A video caught my eye the other week, and it was not about the end times or the Bible. But while I watched it, all I could think about was a prophecy in the book of Revelation. The video was described in these terms, and I quote: Imagine a world where political prisons no longer exist. Abusive regimes no longer need frozen gulags. Re-education through labor is a far-off memory. But tyranny isn't gone. It's pervasive, everywhere. Mass surveillance keeps tabs, from roadside cameras to online trackers to the phone in your pocket. You hesitate saying what you think, even if it's true. You weigh your actions based on social trends. Stepping out of line could end your life, but not in the physical sense. It's a death that's more encompassing, a prison that's everywhere and that can be flipped in an instant. What you risk is that the system itself, society as we know it, will just lock you out. You can't work because you can't get paid. You can't rent a home because you can't digitize the payments. You can't buy food because cash isn't accepted and you have no bank account. You might say you don't believe in sci-fi dystopias like this, but you better start believing because this reality is already here. What I'm talking about is the issue of debanking, and especially the issue of banks canceling accounts for political reasons, tied in with emerging technologies for AI mass surveillance, good or bad citizen ratings, and centralized bank digital currencies, CBDCs. That's a quote from the Josh Phillips show, Debanking is the New World Gulag. For about 17 minutes, Josh talks about debanking, a word not found in the Bible, but I believe everyone should watch it for biblical reasons. Here's why I say that. So, why is this important to me? Well, there are two reasons this issue is important to me and why it should be important to you. The first reason, one, is very personal. I was just effectively debanked for over 6 months. Two, the second reason comes from the book of Revelation, which foretells a time of widespread debanking in the last days that will affect everyone. Well, here's my story. A pastor friend recently invited me to have lunch with him. He insisted on paying the bill and gave the server his card, and a few minutes later the server returned saying that the transaction had been denied. Imagine how my friend must have felt. Somewhere between confused and embarrassed, I suppose. The debit card was backed by thousands of dollars on deposit in the account. He produced another debit card, equally funded, and that transaction went through. As my colleague sat there trying to figure out what the problem was, he remembered there had been some confusion about a transaction on that first card. And the bank, in abundance of caution to prevent possible fraud, had deactivated the card until further confirmation from the cardholder. And he had forgotten to contact the bank to reactivate the card. Well, I had the same experience twice with different banks, and I had to contact them directly to clarify transactions suspected of being fraudulent. It's an inconvenience, but in this age of proliferating scams, I'm glad financial institutions are on the lookout. But this shows how easily a bank can bring our financial activity to a sudden stop. Fortunately, those transactions were small and their resolution was not complicated. It was my being debanked by my Portuguese bank last November that created far more serious problems for me. Here's some background information on that. We moved to Madeira Island, Portugal in 1976 to do mission work, and we lived there 40 years until 2016. We used the same bank all that time as we bought property, completely renovated an old house, owned and operated a Christian bookstore, taught English, worked for the U.S. Department of State as a consular agent. I became a freelance translator in 1990, and that income was also directed to that bank account. And so were the Portuguese Social Security payments we began receiving when we reached age 65. Even after we returned to the U.S. in 2016, my income from translation work and our Portuguese Social Security payments still continued to be deposited directly into that account. As funds accumulate in the Portuguese account, 6 or 7 times a year, I transfer money to my bank here in the US to supplement our Social Security income here, which is enough to keep us from starvation, certainly, but neither is it enough for additional expenses such as travel and auto, home, and health insurance, or any unexpected expenses. Last November, my access to accounts in that bank was suddenly cut off. The bank was not permitted to transmit any financial account information by internet without a specific verification of our personal information. The bank said that was a requirement that applied specifically to customers in 2 countries, the US and the United Arab Emirates, or Dubai, perhaps. Effective anti-money laundering policies, combating the financing of terrorism, most likely. Whatever the reason, it was the start of a 6-month period during which I had no idea what my bank balance was or what transactions were being made on the accounts. I knew our Portuguese Social Security payments were being deposited, but we didn't know how much they were and are in 2026. Thanks to AI, my translation income has dropped by 80% in the last 2 years. Monthly income in the thousands of dollars I was having is now no more than $100 now and then. But every little bit helps, if we can access it, that is. The bank said they had to revalidate our personal information, passports, name, residence proven by utility bills, occupation, tax numbers, both US and Portuguese, any income from Social Security. I emailed PDFs of all those documents they asked for. Then we hit a snag. Updating our residential address required an in-person appearance at the bank. After a stalemate of 3 months, multiple emails, and numerous visits by church members who were willing to go to bat for us, we were informed that a person with a power of attorney from us to deal with all our banking transactions there, it could satisfy that requirement. Having translated dozens of powers of attorney over the years, I drafted a suitable power of attorney. It had to be in English and notarized, of course, and the document and its translation in Portuguese had to be sent to the Arkansas Secretary of State in Little Rock for an apostille. That's an internationally accepted form that makes the document valid for use in a foreign country. Basically, the Secretary of State certifies the notary's signature on the power of attorney. I mailed the power of attorney in English and Portuguese to the Secretary of State and waited over a week for a reply. When it came, rejected. I had checked the wrong box on the submission form and sent a $15 check. I had to resubmit the papers with a $10 check. Then, a week or so later, I had the proper documents to mail to Roberto, our church treasurer we had designated as our attorney in fact. Then it was another 2 weeks before he had the documents in hand and could take them to the bank. But the bank agency had to send the power of attorney to its legal department at the headquarters in Lisbon. More waiting. When the word finally did come back from the legal department, they said they weren't sure the power of attorney would be sufficient, and they were still studying the case. More waiting. We spent another week wondering what step to take next. Meanwhile, I was still getting the same notifications on the bank app that I'd been getting for 6 months. They kept telling me to update our personal information, which I had been doing. Then came a reminder with the added notice, last call to update your data. Before I forwarded that message to Roberto, I decided to try accessing the accounts again. Voila, it worked. For the first time in over 6 months, I could check my bank statement or transfer money. Roberto said he got an email that same day from the man at the bank he had been dealing with, and he said that the matter had been resolved, and explained it was just a matter of updating the personal information on the bank database. Well, Roberto's politest response to that was, well, I'm filing a complaint with the Bank of Portugal and online. That's a long story with a positive ending and a clear message. Our entire financial life can be shut down with one tap of a computer key. We end up with no income, no access to assets. We can't pay bills. We can't buy anything. We are at the mercy of a keystroke, dependent on the whim of a systems operator. But like everything else, even that decision and the subsequent cancellation action is AI controlled and executed. I'm thankful that in the middle of all this mess, the church in Madeira was able and willing to advance us money to allow us to continue meeting our obligations here while we awaited the release of our funds. But let's look at the biblical side of the story. The biblical side to this debanking story directly affects everyone. I'm reading from Revelation chapter 13. John says, "Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast on its behalf and compels the earth and those who live on it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. It also performs great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to earth in front of people. It deceives those who live on earth because of the signs it is permitted to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who live on the earth to make an image of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. It was permitted to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could both speak and cause whoever would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And it makes everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on his right hand or on his forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, the beast's name or the number of its name." That's Revelation 13, verses 11 through 17. This part of the tale of 2 beasts describes how the second beast, in other passages identified as the false prophet, and he will cause the entire world to worship the first beast, who's identified as the Antichrist in other passages. Besides causing an image of the first beast to come to life and have power to kill those who refuse to worship him, the second beast will force everyone to receive a mark on the right hand or forehead. Anyone who refuses to accept that mark and worship the first beast, the Antichrist, will be unable to buy or sell. In other words, they will be debanked. The video I mentioned above explains that a cashless society is already being set up. Although the motives for debanking may be varied, social, racial, political, or religious, the consequences are uniform. You will worship the Antichrist or face the consequences. My friends, the possibility of being debanked is easier than we imagine. Take it from me. If we were debanked for 6 months for something as simple as validating a residential address, complicated perhaps by the ineptitude of bank employees, what if the question before us was whether we would bow down and worship a false god empowered by Satan himself? We were spared the full effect of debanking because only our Portuguese accounts were affected. But we got a taste of how easily and how frivolously we can be cut off by governmental, political, or financial agents, and we were powerless to respond. But I was always at peace. My faith has always been in God, not men, bankers or otherwise. My plan of action for the future is this. It's the same as it's always been. My story today is what I've just told. Well, what about the future? My plan remains unchanged. At the age of 13, I surrendered my life, my all, to God's call to preach his word. And I read Habakkuk 3, verses 17 through 19 as the text of my inaugural message. I didn't realize then how central those words would be in the following 67 years. Despite stumbling and falling along the way, as we all do, even in times of discouragement and despair, these words I read almost 70 years ago still express the faith that is the core foundation of my life, and I have never wavered from them. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there is no fruit on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though the flocks disappear from the pen and there are no herds in the stalls, yet I will celebrate in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord, my Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like those of a deer and enables me to walk on mountain heights. Whatever the future holds, that's still my plan, even if I'm debanked by the Antichrist. What's your plan? Thank you for listening. Watch or listen to my other podcasts on God's Word for our world. Give Me This Mountain, These Things Were Written, and Whistle Stops on My Train of Thought. There's a lot more of God we need to learn about.